Hello, everybody. This is Jeff Brown in Beijing, China, for another 44 Days Radio Sinoland program. Today's podcast is entitled Reality Map. If China were the USA, China in the Americas. There is an old Native American axiom. To understand how someone feels, you must walk 2 moons in their moccasins. This reality map and its references and its reference key say it all. Turning today's real world on its head, this map is thought-provoking and funny. It will challenge your notions of how China perceives the United States and how Westerners see the rest of the world. While perceptions are slowly starting to shift, 99% of the West and a majority of Asians still swallow America's massive propaganda campaign against China. Below are the details about how you would feel if you were a Chinese citizen, or Baba Beijing, my wry name for China's communist leadership. Looking at this upside-down reality map, you can appreciate why China has every right to, in parentheses, privately, end of parentheses, hate the United States. So the name of the map is If China Were the USA, China in the Americas. Created by Jeff J. Brown, 44 Days Radio Sinoland and Publishing, www.44days.net. And obviously, having the key, the map with you in front of you, makes all the difference. I will post the link to this article. Number 1, the U.S. Pacific Zone is the same thing as the South China Sea. Since the end of World War II, China has been extremely hostile to the capitalist government in the United States. Due to Chinese fears of America gaining influence in the Americas, starting in 2011, China began moving most of its blue water navy off the coast of North America, around Hawaii, in the Gulf of Alaska, including numerous submarines, outside the San Juan Islands in Seattle, as well as within 22 kilometers of the Catalina Islands off Los Angeles. Additionally, since 1945, China has been and continues to fly thousands of spy missions along America's western coastline. China tells the world that these high-pressure threats against the United States are to, quote, guarantee the freedom of navigation for vital shipping in the Pacific, end of quote. All of China's supine client states go along with this fiction and parrot the mainstream Chinese propaganda, even though it could trigger a nuclear World War III between the two superpowers. Number 2, in Yukon, Canada, this would be the same thing as Afghanistan. Since the early 1990s, China has kept tens of thousands of troops and contractors in the Yukons, supposedly to control Canadian terrorists. But like the North Baja, California, see below, there is a much more sinister reason. China's secret services, the Ministry of State Security, also abbreviated MSS, has dramatically expanded opium production in this region from nearly 0 to over 6,000 metric tons of opium. This MSS drug racket is worth billions of dollars, which it then uses off budget to finance terrorists such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, as well as color revolutions around the world. China uses these various terrorist tools to overthrow anti-Chinese governments, especially if they have hydrocarbons or are strategically located and need to be controlled by China. Number 3, in northwest United States, this would be the same thing as in China's Xinjiang province. Since China's creation of anti-Canadian terrorist armies around the world, starting in the 1980s with Al-Qaeda in the Yukon, China is now using its thinly veiled NGOs to send American separatists to the Yukon for terrorist training as well as train local American separatists in the arts of urban warfare and civil riots. These imported and local terrorists use their newfound skills to create false flag attacks and destabilization of the U.S. government. China touts its NGOs as beacons of universal values, such as the Chinese dream, Chinese dictatorship of the proletariat, socialism with Chinese characteristics, and building a moderately prosperous society in every way. But America knows better. China's NGOs and many of its politicians call this part of the United States the Republic of Northwest Pacifica. Number 4, in Southwest United States, this would be the same thing for China and Tibet. Since World War II, China has spent and continues to spend many tens of millions of dollars in the Southwest United States financing and training terrorist separatists to infiltrate and commit false flags in the U.S. See number 3 for details. Chinese politicians like to grandstand and call this American region Free Texazona. Number 5, Northern Baja California would be the same thing as for China, Burma. Since the 1950s, China's MSS has funded separatist Mexican rebels along America's southwest flank in order to maintain turmoil and a base for false flags inside the U.S. This is in keeping with China's post-war policy of destabilizing and replacing America's capitalist government in order to install a puppet leader so that China can balkanize the United States and plunder its human and natural resources. To make matters worse, the MSS controls all the opium and heroin production in North Baja and uses its billions in profits to pay for regime change and black ops around the world, especially wherever hydrocarbons are found or strategic interests are found. See Yukon, Canada above for reference. Number 6, South Baja California. This would be like for China, South Korea. Since the 1950s, China has maintained 9 big military bases which house 30,000 People's Liberation Army, which is also known as the PLA, 30,000 PLA soldiers in South Baja California under the pretext of guarding against possible Canadian military adventures. China is also pressuring Mexico to maintain missiles in South Baja, ostensibly to protect Mexico from Canada, but everyone knows they would be aimed at the United States. Number 7, Mexico, which for China would be like Vietnam. After completely destroying Mexico and killing more than 3 million of its citizens during the Mexican War 1950 to 1974, China makes all kinds of secret, unrealistic promises to the Mexican government while jerking the Mexican nationalist chain to get Mexico to attack America's biggest oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, ramming it with Coast Guard ships and firing on it with water cannons. This happened during President Xi Jinping's visit to China's vassal states in the American hemisphere in 2013-2014. Number 8, Belize, which would be for China the same thing as the Philippines. After kicking the Chinese military out in the early 1990s, something almost no other Chinese client state has ever done, in 2014, Baba Beijing paid off Belize's key civilian and military leaders in order to reoccupy it with 1,000 rapid deployment PLA soldiers. This PLA brigade is ready 24/7 to attack the United States when the time comes. Number 9, Cuba, which for China would be the same thing as Japan. Since the end of World War II, China has maintained almost 100 military bases on occupied Cuba with 50,000 PLA soldiers, a huge air force and navy right on America's doorstep. They are supposedly to resist Canada's military schemes, but everybody knows they are there to destabilize, harass, and eventually attack the United States of America. Lately, President Xi has been pushing President Castro in Cuba to amend its constitution so that it can remilitarize and again be a powerful military threat to Uncle Sam. Number 10, the Bahamas, which would be the same thing for China, but would be Taiwan. After World War II, with desegregation starting, a large contingent of U.S. racists sailed to the Bahamas, aided and abetted by China, to be a separatist U.S. government, the real United States, and not the evil, corrupt, capitalist one on the mainland. China guarantees the Bahamas security and keeps it armed to the teeth against potential mainland aggression. Beijing, China also uses the Bahamas to saturate the U.S. East Coast with nonstop propaganda on its Radio Free America, Radio Free China, touting the Chinese dream while trashing Washington with lies, disinformation, and lurid details of official corruption, innuendo, and vicious rumors. Number 11, the American Virgin Islands. This would be very similar, and this is in the Caribbean, to the Diaoyu Islands, or what the Japanese call the Senkakus. In 1971, just months before Mao Zedong announced diplomatic relations with Richard Nixon, he gave, quote, the American Virgin Islands to Cuba using the pretext of a post-war agreement between China and Cuba. Occupied and controlled by Cuba, America still claims these islands as historically its own. Number 12, Brazil, which would be the same thing for China as Australia. China has convinced satrap Brazil to keep 1,000 PLA soldiers at their military base in Salvador, Brazil. Just recently, the PLA is in negotiations to get the Brazilians to maintain a fleet of tactical nuclear-armed Chinese bombers in Salvador for rapid deployment to the United States when the time comes. At China's behest, Brazil is mulling over joining up with China in its heavy-handed pressure on the United States by sailing Navy ships along America's coast, as well as flying spy planes over American islands. And there you have it, the absurd world that we would have if China behaved the way the United States does. Thank you, and have a great day.